Morning, members. It is now 10 o'clock, or a little tiny bit past. So, welcome to the meeting of the Exmoor National Park Authority of Tuesday, the 2nd of August. We'll start item 1, apologies for absence, and I have quite a list here. Marcus Crevis, Steve Griffiths, Stephen Pugsley, Evelyn Stacey, and I think Penny Webber, because she's not here at the moment. And were there any others? Thank you very much. To move to item 2, declarations of interest, any lobbying. Andy Milne on item 3.2 is a neighbour of the applicant, so is withdrawing from that item. Members, any other declarations of interest, please? Or any lobbying? Thank you very much. Nothing recorded there, Judy. I've got a couple of announcements, nothing very much at all. First of all, I better welcome Fran Smith to her first authority meeting. So, yeah, welcome Fran. She's appointed by Somerset County Council. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep. And the second announcement, of course, is that in Stephen Pugsley's absence, Stephen's on holiday at the moment, Andrea will be chairing the planning section of the meeting. Item 4, minutes of the last meeting. I assume you've all read the minutes of the last meeting, so can somebody move approval? Thank you, Mike, and Jeremy Holton seconded. Now, to consider any matters arising from those minutes. And page by page basis, as per usual. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Right, thank you very much. We have some members of the public for public speaking, and they will be taken against the item which they would like to speak against, as per normal convention. To move on to item 6, Exmoor National Park Authority car park improvement proposals, and Rob Wilson North. Welcome, Rob, and over to you.
Good morning, members. This is a very short paper just to put car parks back into your minds again, and I'll take you very briefly through it. I won't spend too much time doing that. Our programme of works to car parks began under our land visioning in 2019-20. You will remember sort of maps laid out in this room and talking about the assets that we hold and how we could make better use of them. And what came out of that process was our own car parks needing, in a sense, to reflect Exmoor and what the National Park is and stands for, not the National Park Authority, but what the National Park stands for in a more effective way. And at the same time, to be much more consistent in the charging mechanisms we used in those car parks. And what we said at the time was we would bring forward individual schemes for car parks, one at a time. We treat each car park as an entity and bring them forward to you for approval of specific schemes, one at a time. So we're sort of well into the process now, and we thought it'd be a good point in time just to reflect on what we've done and to talk about the sites that we want to focus on next. So there's no detail to be discussed today from my point of view. It's simply almost like a time check on where we've got to. So looking back over the schemes we've done to date, the first car park we brought to you was Ashcombe in Simmonsbath, which is a small but very well used car park, has been incredibly solidly used during COVID. And the works there comprise substantial works to the toilet building, which was incredibly substandard, I would say, by the time we got to do the works. It had a substantial investment of about £50,000 there. We've also installed new interpretation. The existing interpretation was out of date, so we've installed new interpretation, and a car park machine has now been installed to replace a cash cairn that was in the car park. We've still got some final works to do on signage there, all of which was approved previously, so that will be completed by the end of this summer. Tar steps were relatively minor works. We put in a second car parking machine. If you know the car park there, it's on several levels, and the existing car park machine, the original one, was at the upper level, and it seemed sensible to have a second machine on the lower level for the convenience of people visiting the car park, but also as a mechanism for resilience. We have had issues with machines going offline and losing quite substantial amounts of income over, say, a bank holiday weekend. At Tar Steps, we might lose in the thousands of income. So having a second machine seems like a sensible provision. And then the most recent scheme to be completed, and by far the most substantial one, was at Valley of Rocks, where the site came to us, my understanding, as almost like a caravanning site. So it's a circuitous road around the site, a very, very large area of grass which people tend to park all over, and very uncertain how you use the car park, where you park, where you're meant to park, where you're not meant to park. So we put in a scheme that tries to balance making it intelligible for visitors in terms of more parking in more defined spaces, but without urbanising the scheme. So it's still very, very open site, and it allows us to manage the visitor flow there a bit better. And a second car park machine for similar reasons to Tar Steps, and an interpretation board. And we're just at the point of finishing the signs for that site, and that will be done by the end of the summer. But the major capital works on the site have been completed already, and I would suggest that if you get the opportunity to go and have a look at that, because I think it's a good result by and large there. Which brings me to locations where we plan to do works over the next 12 to 18 months. And our priority is or the first on the list, if you like, is at Exmoor, where we own the car park in the centre of the village, and it hasn't seen investment for about 20 years. There is no interpretation. It's not even clear that we own it for visitors. It's a site that's very well used by visitors and by the local community and local businesses. So our first approach there is to talk to the parish council, which I'm happy to say that I'm doing in September, to listen to their views on how they see the car park and how they see improvements being made there. Once that has been done, we will develop a scheme for that, a detailed scheme, and bring that to you for approval, hopefully towards the end of this year, so hopefully by December. The next site is Goat Hill Bridge, which, for those of you who are scratching your heads, is, if you imagine at the entrance to Pinkery, at the drive to Pinkery, there is a very long lay-by out there, which the National Park Authority has owned for a considerable amount of time. During COVID, it was, in inverted commas, at capacity on a number of occasions. It seems incredible, but it was very well used because people were seeking out Pinkery Pond and getting out onto the moorland that we own. And so we think we can make a better experience for visitors there. We don't intend to install a car park machine. We intend to invite people to contribute to Caremore there, and give some interpretation of the landscape that people are coming into. We think that's needed. Again, a detailed scheme on that. It'll be a very light touch scheme, but a detailed scheme will come to you for approval. Simonsbath Sawmill is the next one. There is considerable issues in Simonsbath with on-road parking, which are being addressed currently. But part of the solution that we've offered is a small car park at the sawmill, and that is not without difficulty. It's probably acceptable in landscape terms. I say probably acceptable, but the big issue there is it's on the banks of the River Barle. It's very close to the Barle, So we've got triple SIs to think about and potential runoff from car parks and things like that. So Environment Agency consent is going to be quite a challenge on that one, and designing a good scheme there that is affordable to us and delivers what we want will be quite a challenge. So we plan to progress that, but I would recommend that you don't hold your breath on that one. Given our experience in the past, these things will take time. And then finally, Haddon Hill, which due to our own capacity, we won't be looking at until next year. So we won't even be thinking about that one until next year. And what I would say to you is that the capacity to advance these schemes is primarily from internal officer time, from people who already have a day job. So this is something that we are fitting around everything else we do. We're prioritising it, but it nevertheless is quite hard for us to progress these things as quick as we would like. I think that's it, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rob. Members, Mike.
I don't know about the other car parks, but the one in Exford, we're still experiencing a lot of problems with overnight camper vans parking there and discharging their toilets into the public toilets that we manage, and we get an ongoing situation where the toilets become blocked because they won't accept the large bulk of material from one of those canisters that is thrown down there, and then the council has to pay to get someone in there to clear it and clean up the mess afterwards. So that is something that we as a parish council will be canvassing for, to try to make sure that there are signs up, no overnight parking, but it needs to be enforced some way or another, and I don't know how to do it. I did speak to one of the camper vans that were parked there overnight the other day, but he said he'd move on, but he didn't. And the parish council has no power in which to enforce that. But I understand that the National Park will have that power, or would have that power, being the landowner. So it's something that we would like taken into consideration, please. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, Mike, I'm very happy to, as I say, if I come to the Parish Council on 22nd of September, that and other concerns, and we'll try and design the issues that are raised at that meeting into the scheme that we bring forward. So we'll try and address those. We're going to start by talking to the Parish Council. We're not going to start with a scheme. We're going to listen to you.
Thank you, Bob. Andrea Davis first, and then you, Christine.
Yes, Chairman, this is all very good. A lot of progress. I just want to talk about Goat Hill Bridge, because I'm a bit concerned with creating ourselves more work than we need to do. I'm quite happy to move these recommendations, but add in that in principle we approve what you're suggesting at Goat Hill Bridge, and we put some trust in our officers because it is a very sensitive location. But do we really need a paper coming back to tell us what they're going to do? I mean, yeah, there's not much you're going to do there. You're going to put out some interpretation boards and a cairn. I'm not sure we need to have yet another item on yet another agenda to discuss this. So I'm happy to move the recommendations we've got, which is basically to note the report, but add in that in principle we approve Goat Hill Bridge and the scheme to be brought forward by officers. It doesn't need to come back to us, I'm sure.
Lovely. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Mike. We'll come to that in a moment. Were there any... Well, I know Christine had a question first.
Yeah, just to say, I sympathise with the situation in Exford. It is very difficult. They solved it in Minehead by closing earlier and opening later, so that it dissuaded people from using that at difficult times in the day. Early morning it got very busy, and late in the evening it got very busy. It was helpful to do that in one of the toilets in Minehead, and the other one was to fit a machine where people can empty latrines and such like, but make sure that everybody pays for what they are doing, and then it becomes a cost reduction. I wouldn't say it's cost free, but either way it's an ongoing problem for many of us, and it's not going to go away because camper vans and holidaying in that way is really of the moment, isn't it? But I do sympathise. It's not easy.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, I do agree with your comments, Sarah, because I think it's important that we don't just look at preventing things, we look at facilitating responsible behaviour
Yeah.
alongside it, and that may be something around better facilities or more facilities, or just provision of a facility,
Yeah,
and what's there, really.
not easy.
I'll go first of all to Francis and then to you, Linda.
Just a thought on the overnight camping. Now, it divides people very, very considerably as to whether it's something that's appropriate and okay, or actually really bad behaviour. I wonder whether actually that's something we need to think about. And therefore, and should we come to the point where we think that actually part of our purposes of encouraging people to be here is to enable them to do this, then we need to think about, we can't be wrecking the parish council's public toilets, but do we need to think about some other way of enabling people to get rid of their canisters of effluent, as a polite word, and or whether in fact we're saying, well, that's just taking trade away from official caravan sites. I think we need, I think there's perhaps something that we ought to think about there, and a couple of other ones. It would be really helpful, Rob. I think there was discussion at the parish council, Exmoor Parish Council last week, about both Ashcombe and the sawmill and parking, and it might be helpful to have perhaps a conversation outside the meeting about that. And my only other one is, if you put a pay machine at Haddon Hill, maybe we'll use the car park. There's a mile-long straight road that everybody will park on. I think we're hiding for nothing there.
Francis, I'll go through the questions there and let you have a response then. Rob, is that easier?
Yeah, that's fine.
Linda?
Thank you. Yeah, I think some time ago we had a debate. I'm not sure we came to conclusions about whether we would allow the occasional overnight camper van in certain car parks. So I think we probably need that debate again. My question was really, what's the parking charges and pricing these?
Sorry.
What's the car park charges for these, and do we have a residence discount or some kind of plan?
No, we've had different opinions on residence permits and things like that, but the take-up can be very low, and it's not necessarily a good way of doing it. So we've had different views expressed on that from other organisations. Our proposal is to charge £3 for a half day, £5 for a day, or to be in line with neighbouring organisations.
So
if
does
you're
that
in the Valley
mirror
of
the
Rocks,
National Trust?
sorry?
Does that mirror the National Trust?
The National Trust, my understanding is they charge £5. It doesn't matter how long you're there for. So that's £5 for a day, but you can be there for 2 hours and it's still £5. So we don't think that's reasonable. And the other thing is the charging period. So our approach is not to charge before 10 and not to charge after it's 5 or 6 in the evening, can't remember. So if people want to be there early or late, then they can do it for free. As I say, we're trying to be consistent in charging, but we're trying to be also at the same time taking each car park in its own setting. So if you're in the Valley of Rocks, we don't want to be able to step with what Linton and the Town Council charge, because that would cause its own difficulties, obviously. And I think just to round it off, I think if we're providing a car park is one thing, providing car park and public toilets, which cost a considerable amount of money per year to maintain, is something else. And if people choose not to use the car park, then we still have to pay for the public toilets. We don't close them. So that facility is there and costs the authority quite a lot of money to run.
Thank you, Rob. John, between us.
Thanks, Chairman. I only live a couple of miles from the Valley of Rocks car park, and I'm sure Rob remembers that when the proposals were first made public and the planning application went in, there was a certain amount of local interest and pitchforks being waved. But I've got to say that since the work's been done, I haven't heard anybody complain. I'm sure there's somebody, but I mean, I haven't heard them, so you've calmed it down, so it worked fine.
Lovely. Thank you, John. It is appreciated sometimes to hear report the good side rather than a complaint all the time. Jeremy Yabsley.
Thank you, Chairman. Not add too much to this. I think this is an issue for a forum, perhaps. With the emptying of waste issue, even in Witheridge, we get camper vans emptying their waste down the single toilet we have. And I think that it's not just with staying overnight. We don't have any staying overnight, but passing through. So strategically, pay for facilities for doing this, I think is probably on the cards where there is a lot of use. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Andy?
Yes, also connected to the same issue, I'm afraid. My predecessor, far more competent than myself, Karen Mills, was an ardent and enthusiastic motorhome operator, and the perpetual problem was there was a lack of motorhome opportunities on Exmoor. I've no idea if they've improved in the last 4 years, but I doubt it, and that is the fundamental problem for this wild motorhoming and the problems we have with the effluent and so on. And it does definitely need it's something we need to address.
Thank you, Andy. Susan?
Just really picking up on what Linda was saying about charging and that, and I was just thinking about, I know we've had some quite interesting debates about what we charge or don't we charge or how we charge, and I was just thinking of it in the kind of wider context of the park and looking ahead in terms of our, our future income and the projections that we see from Gordon about the, the increasing gaps that we have. And so I do think that obviously we need, we have always this balance between being, accessible and inclusive, yet also, people being, provided with good facilities and paying an appropriate amount of money. So I do think we need to be, £3 is awfully cheap. Relatively, I think about why I now have to pay if I want to go to a car park near the sea down in East Devon, for example, and what those kinds of things. So I understand that we need to be sensitive to different locations, but I was just wanting to emphasise that we need to be thinking very seriously about how we generate our income. This is an important stream of that, and it's not about taking loads of money off people. It's about charging an appropriate amount of money for provision of really good quality services in a national park. People pay a lot of money to do a lot of other things, and I think it does concern me that we might just we need to keep that bigger picture in mind when we talk about, we can get into the detail of each site and all the rest of it, which is obviously important to be sensitive to those areas and those communities and whatever, but bigger picture stuff, this is a really important way to generate income that we really need. Yeah. So I was just wanting to kind of bring that bigger framing back to things whilst dealing with all these individual things. I'm not solving any problems, I'm just kind of, apologies, I'm just trying to say it's a concern about future income, and so how do we make sure that we're being fair, but not too, we're not getting due return for the services we're providing. Yes.
Thank you, Susan, for bringing that bit of reality into it. I think that is a really important point, and I think it's something that will become increasingly evident as we discuss finances throughout the course of the next few months and so on. But
could I just come back to Susan? And thank you for that. I think we are very mindful of certain other national park authorities that are too reliant on car park income for their core business, and that was never the intention with us. So, and I'm not saying I think we're very clear that we only have to look at this year compared to last. The visitor numbers go up and down like a yo-yo. Perhaps that's an exaggeration, but that's what's happening at the moment. So, nevertheless, the costs of these facilities and the income we can get from them to offset that DEFRA grant, actually, it's the DEFRA grant that we're trying to protect here, it's pretty fundamental. But we were also very clear with land visioning, and I was amazed that it was the staff that prioritised car parks. So that's the conservation team and all the others. They didn't think moorland, they thought car parks, because actually that's what most people who come to Exmoor have contact with us through. And in some there isn't a sign saying it's a national park. So it's that each scheme taken as an individual, how can we make that better there? Of which charging is a part, but it's also the offer, if you like, to use that awful word, the offer in that place. Yeah.
Thank you, Rob. And Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wondered a question, is there a restriction on the amount of revenue, that your profit you get from the car parks, and what it can be used for. Because I know in the district councils there is actually a limitation on what you can actually use the money for. I think it's covered under the 1984 Traffic Act, in fact. I just wondered if that applies to the national parks as well. And I suppose the second point really is you have to be careful, because as you start to increase charging the car parking, you drive people out of the car parks and onto the roads. And of course that then moves the problem for a fact of somewhere we don't want it to go. The third point, which I never had actually until when I started speaking, but I've driven across the moors a couple of times and I've seen camper vans which are pretty obviously going to be parked there overnight, and they've pulled up and they've stopped. So the problem is, I suppose, is that anywhere where something of that size can pull off of the road, they will do so. So I suppose there's a couple of points there, but also just a concern.
I think we're touching on something which is much wider, which is a sort of an access and recreation strategy, which we've talked about finding the resources to do, to look at the nature of the way people use the national park, what they want from that. And that's a much bigger conversation that goes way beyond this organisation. It's obviously key to us, but it's key to other organisations too. So that's something else, that's a piece of work we're looking at, so a more strategic approach to how we address what visitors want from Exmoor. In terms of our own facilities and the costs of them, we spend, I think we're a very, very long way off having to worry about balancing the books on our car parks. And we always said what we didn't seek to do was generate income, generate profit, if you like, from these charges. What we're trying to do is, as I say, to defend the DEFRA grant, so that the DEFRA grant doesn't go into providing free facilities in car parks like public toilets at great expense, when most people expect to pay to park. And if you don't want to pay to park, then there are plenty of places on Exmoor where you can park for free. And I do that, and sometimes I'll go to a car park and pay. And I think with a reasonable, I'm speaking as an individual as well as an officer, I think most people who go to a town will expect to pay considerable amounts of money, £17 a day to park in its bath. So we shouldn't be ashamed of charging for our car parks, because we are spending our DEFRA grant, which is going down, as we know, on providing those facilities at cost. And that money could be used for other things.
You may. Go on, Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I understand. I mean, the idea of running the car parks effectively is that you don't make additional revenue. It doesn't go into a central fund, effectively. And obviously you want to make it, but I just hesitate is that if you're overpriced, you talk about £17, there is no way I'm going up to Havant Hill to walk my dogs for 17 quid. I will park on the road. Yeah. So, it's just, as you say, as an individual, you've got to be careful here on what we do and what we influence and what we affect, if not indirectly.
And that's why the schemes we brought forward are very carefully thought through. And I take entirely what Andrew says about sort of the very minor ones. But for us, it's quite hard to draw that line, so that's quite helpful, thank you. But in terms of somewhere like Exford, we literally, we go with an open book to that. We have some ideas, but nothing more than that. And we want to understand what the local ramifications are of any proposals. So we want to understand what the local context is first. And some of our car parks are quite remote, so they're in the middle of nowhere effectively. So it's a different kind of exercise in terms of understanding the context, if you like.
I think the one word that's come up a couple of times during the discussion that I'm always quite hesitant about is the minute anyone says the word enforcement. Just be realistic. There's not the capacity to work an enforcement process, is there, Rob? And actually there's not a lot of will for enforcement. Most people are actually quite willing to look at a reasonable charge and pay. In fact, I've seen several car parks throughout varying regions of the country that are purely voluntary. People never read that bit of writing at the bottom, said this is a voluntary contribution. They still pay because they are conditioned to put money into a car parking machine when they see one. That is the reality. I think the bit around the DEFRA grant, quite important to bear that in mind as members. We need to protect our DEFRA grant. But there is an element also of ensuring that we don't head down that income generation route so hard that it's detrimental to the people that use the place and value it, and it doesn't give DEFRA the excuse to look at us and say, oh, you're earning that much money there, you don't need as much from your DEFRA grant. They don't need any excuses, I can assure you at the moment. We don't want to give them any. We need to actually look at those people that we are set there to provide a service to and bear them in mind. I've had a proposer and a seconder for this. It is to note the progress to date and to approve the development of schemes with the caveat that Andrea had in there, that not to ask Rob to come back with a report, that I'm sure he's to continue with progress and develop that proposal, Rob. So, all those in favour? Is that everyone? Yes, that is everyone. Thank you, Judy. Thank you very much. And we will move on to item 7. Thank you, Rob, very much for that. We'll move on to item 7, a woodland management update, and welcome Graham McVitie. We've got quite a lot of woodland on Exmoor, and we're very fortunate to have Graham overseeing it as well.
Maybe we'll have some more. Morning, everybody.
Stab the button on the mic, please, Graham. That one, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Bear with me 1 second whilst I... How do I find... Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Sorry. Curation. So that one.
No, it's not. Sorry, it's that one. Well, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, everybody. It was a few weeks I was here talking about the tree nursery on Exmoor, and I think we thought it might be a good opportunity at some point for me to present an update on corporate plan priorities, which I'm happy to do. So I'll run through a few of the corporate plan priorities, give an idea of where we are, an update on actions and some of the projects and partnerships that we're working on, which help deliver those priorities. So just very briefly, I've done far too many slides as usual, so I've crammed far too much in, so I will have to rattle through it fairly quickly. So please stop me or ask questions at the end. But very briefly, just to remind members of the arrangement of woodland on Exmoor. The map you're looking at is based on the National Forest Inventory woodland. So the green is existing broadleaf and conifer woodland. The blue areas are woodland that we own or manage. It's changed slightly. The Barl Valley lease has now expired, so we no longer manage those woodlands just up the valley here around Hawkridge. And the red edged areas are other areas of land that we own, which we also have some ideas around, which I'll talk about shortly when we get to that point. And in terms of the breakdown, very briefly, this is what the National Forest Inventory says we have, and I'm not going to go through that in a great deal of detail, but basically the green on there is broadleaf woodland. We have around 21% ancient semi-natural woodland. The brown is the kind of the productive conifer. But some of the interesting statistics in here. So the National Forest Inventory tells us we have 13.6% woodland cover, and you may have seen some of the national targets to increase tree and woodland cover. And I think we need to get a bit of clarity around what some of these metrics are and what we might be asked to do. Because sometimes I think the baseline is different depending on what we're looking at. So England forestry cover is currently around 10%. There is a DEFRA proposal to increase total canopy cover to 17.5%. And that's sometimes getting a bit conflated with the Committee for Climate Change aspirations to increase UK forest cover by 17%. So there's just a little bit of confusion about what the metric is, what the baseline is, and what the ambitions are. So I think going forward, we need to be very clear about what we want to do and what we're actually measuring. So 10% England cover to 17.5% seems incredibly ambitious. And if we're being asked to do the same thing, then I think we need to be clear about what we're moving from and what we're moving to. And it may appear that we're not having to do quite such a great deal of heavy lifting as may originally. We're probably a lot further to the target than we appreciate. So I think as we develop and refine our data, we'll better understand exactly what we might have to do. And just a quick reminder of what we have. We have some of the best and most outstanding woodland in the country. This is Horner Wood in the foreground, Hawcoombe Wood in the background, Porlock Common behind that. These are all national nature reserves, sites of special scientific interest. Some of the best quality and best protected woodland in the country. We also have some of the highest productive conifer woodland in the country. These are growing at a tremendous rate and provide a huge amount of employment and income opportunities for Exmoor. But interestingly, going back to that point I made earlier, this is also a landscape of small trees and small woodlands and hedges, much of which aren't really captured in the data. So again, we need to be clear about what we have and understand where we might want to get to. So I'd like to run through some of the corporate plan actions, and I've abbreviated these slightly. The corporate plan actions are there's more description about what we plan to do. Some are original actions, and we've brought a few in more recently as opportunities have cropped up. And I think the funding environment at the moment is very dynamic and quite fast-moving. So we need to be careful not to simply jump to funding opportunities as they crop up, but keep ourselves pretty disciplined in terms of what our corporate actions are. But in terms of those actions in bold, I'll want to talk about in a little bit more detail. Those that aren't in bold, I'll quickly. So the Coastal Woodland Project, for example, is part of a landscape partnerships bid that we've got in with DEFRA at the moment. That's a £500,000 bid for quite an ambitious programme to expand and protect coastal temperate rainforest habitat along the North Exmoor coast. We're waiting to hear the outcome of that. Ashcombe and Ashley Combe Gardens are a garden. I will talk about that a little bit later on. These are some works we're doing on our own land to restore some of the picturesque historic garden landscapes in those two sites. And then the Forest for Somerset project, that's still kind of moving on quite quickly. So Somerset County Council put together a partnership with the districts, and we were involved to put a bid into the Trees Call for Action bid for the Forestry Commission to promote woodland expansion across the whole of Somerset. Ultimately that bid failed, but they've also gone ahead with a follow-up bid to the Woodland Accelerator Fund, which is another Forestry Commission bid, which we're also involved with, and that's pending at the moment. So there are lots of opportunities around to increase forest cover. An interesting outcome of that failed bid is we developed some quite strong links with Somerset West and Taunton Council, which resulted in them agreeing to support the creation of a new post. So we now have a treescapes officer with us for 2 years, whose job role it is to promote increased tree cover on Exmoor and West Somerset. So we're really grateful to Somerset West and Taunton for that post, and we're working closely with them on a number of projects. So I'd now like to run through some of the actions there that I've emboldened. And the first one is our tree and woodland strategy. So this is a slightly kind of fabled thing that I've been trying to write for a couple of years now, and I keep not getting the time to do it. But hopefully with Robin in post now, we'll be able to get on with this. So tree and woodland strategies, there are many of them around the country. They take different kind of forms, but ultimately what they are about trying to identify what our what we need to do in terms of increasing tree and woodland cover, and how we want to go about managing and protecting our existing trees and woodlands. And we've had woodland strategies in some form or another, embedded in other policies, but this will be a piece of work that's kind of freestanding, and which we'll be able to use to better showcase what it is we want to do and how we want to help develop some ideas. Objectives, I won't go through all of these. I was trying to get kind of quite creative with the letter C in there, and the objectives are all really just to further focus our attention on what needs to be done. Many tree strategies are based around kind of spatial mapping, looking at where the opportunities and the constraints might lie, and we can develop these spatial tools to help us target new woodland more effectively, or to direct inappropriate proposals more effectively. So they work two ways. They can help us identify and promote opportunities, or we're not seeing many as we used to, but there are still many examples around of carbon investors bringing big afforestation proposals, which may or may not be appropriate. So these kind of spatial tools are quite useful. This is one the Forestry Commission have developed and use, and it's quite broad and quite crude in many ways. It simply looks at areas that are highly sensitive to woodland creation, medium sensitive, and there's about somewhere on that map is 18 hectares of low sensitivity. I'm not sure where it is. But the idea is just to give the Forestry Commission some idea of where there are likely to be issues cropping up if woodland is proposed in these areas. But we need to build on top of this other issues around landscape character, around nature recovery, around agricultural values and flood management and water issues. And we've taken this to a slightly different level. So I mentioned the landscape partnerships bid to look at increasing cover in the coastal rainforest areas, the temperate rainforests, and this is really taking some of those opportunities and constraints to a slightly different level. So dark green on this map are existing woodland, and there are a number of opportunities to link and expand some of that existing woodland. It's difficult to see at this scale, but some of the lighter green shows where there are few constraints and more opportunity to expand woodland. The yellow show medium priority, so there's some opportunities to link and expand, and then the mauve and maroon areas show where there are increasing constraints. So again, it just takes us down to a slightly more detailed level in terms of where we might think there are some opportunities or constraints, and just helps us to kind of target what we want to do. Other examples, again, this has come out a bit grainy, but Cornwall have gone through a process, again, using a fairly simple 3-tier system, so highly suitable, very suitable, or good, or of good suitability. And again, that's probably, you can see that's looking at some of the valleys and how woodland might expand in some of those valleys. So we're working on a similar map. So Matt Sully and I are trying to build up a similar kind of spatial map for Exmoor, looking at where some of those opportunities might be. And we will come back and talk about this in more detail. And I will be talking to our woodland group about this as well. So these are very early days, and these are just proposals at this stage without any. We'll hopefully bring it forward for more discussion and agreement in future. A couple of things. What these kind of maps don't show, as I said at the beginning, are trees outside woods. And that's probably a much more significant component of the treescape than we appreciate. That we're probably much closer to the national targets than we might understand. And there's probably therefore more opportunities in that to integrate trees into the farmed landscape in a way that isn't displacing other activities. And I think there's a lot of opportunities just to bring some of these mosaics and some of these transitions into the farmed landscape in such a way that's hopefully more appropriate and more acceptable. And I think we're beginning to understand much better the value of total canopy cover rather than simply taking hectares of land out to turn into woodland. And I think those some really interesting areas to work on around there. So continuing with the tree strategy, another really important part is to understand how we protect and improve what we've got. A lot of the tree strategies around the country are really focusing on new trees and new woodland, and I think we really need to better understand, and well, I think we understand, but to focus more on managing and protecting our existing tree resource. And at the moment, a lot of this is focusing around biosecurity, adapting to climate change, making our treescapes more resilient to disease and climate changes. And it sometimes feels we're in a bit of a race to try and keep up. But the first thing I'd like to look at is around tree health. We're dealing a lot with ash dieback at the moment, and you know we are set to lose 95% of our ash, as I've reported before. But underlying that, there are all the existing tree diseases that we've been dealing with for a number of years. The image that you're looking at is Phytophthora on larch, and that still continues to be a real problem. It felt earlier this year that the really dry weather might have slowed down its spread, but it does seem to have picked up, and we're seeing a lot more incidences of Phytophthora on larch and sweet chestnut. There are new Phytophtheras around. There's a Phytophthora pluvialis, which is now affecting Douglas fir and hemlock. So there's a real problem with tree diseases. And as we do see drier, warmer periods, I think we're becoming much clearer about this link between climate change and tree diseases. And that's something that we really need to be aware of and understand. Other serious threats to be aware of, things like the oak processionary moth, not only tree health, but human health. If people come into contact with these, they can cause respiratory problems and skin problems, and they are spreading. They were first noted in the Royal Parks in London, but they're now spreading out beyond the home counties, and there have been incidents in Hampshire recently. So these pests are spreading, and they're very difficult to control. So we need to be, and I'm focusing on oak, because clearly oak is a major tree on Exmoor, and if any of these, you know, I'll show you another example in a minute, but you know, we might in future consider ash dieback to have been a relatively small problem if some of these tree diseases affect our oak. We have around 22 pests and 25 disease threats which we are present or have some transmission path into the UK that we need to be vigilant and aware of. The other issue around oak is acute oak decline, which has a distribution, as you can see on the map on the right. Again, this seems to be climate related. There's a vector beetle involved, and they prefer drier, warmer conditions. As we see more drier and warmer conditions, we're likely to see incidents of oak decline increase. We haven't had one much further than, is that Dorset or Wiltshire perhaps, the most further west. But it will continue to spread, and this is going to be another serious issue. And this, again, this relationship between climate and tree health is a really toxic mix. Just a little bit of evidence that we've been gathering locally in terms of climate. Since 2006, we've been monitoring a number of trees around Exmoor to look at average bud burst and leaf emergence, and these are two measurements that are commonly understood as a measurement of spring, if you like. The dark blue line is bud burst, and the light blue is leaf emergence. But the important point to note here is the line of best fit is showing a clear trend towards earlier springs. So bud burst and leaf emergence is on average a couple of weeks earlier than it was when we started this piece of work back in 2006. So we're getting warmer, earlier springs. And one of the consequences of that, shown here to very dramatic effect, Simmons Bath, West Cottages, just in the background there. These are some beech trees 2 or 3 years ago. We had a very warm spring, as those graphs have shown. We've got a trend towards. Leaves emerged very early, and then we had a very, very late frost, and the beech trees got absolutely hammered. Those aren't copper beech, those are beech with frosted foliage. So this is a serious situation. They all recovered, but they won't take many more hits like this. The more of these kind of dramatic climate effects that these trees experience, it's a huge energy burden on the tree, and at some point, and we do see it, that they're just not going to be able to survive. But we must avoid the situation where we're just trying to recover from one crisis after another, whether it's disease or climate or other issues. We need to get ahead of these problems rather than trying to catch up with them all the time. The other big issue we're dealing with, grey squirrels, often underestimated as a problem. It's costing the country tens of millions of pounds in terms of economic impact on forests. And if this kind of damage continues, then all our ambitions around climate recovery, around nature recovery, about natural flood management will be thwarted, because the squirrels are just causing an immense amount of damage. So we really need to get to grips with this problem. So I'm pleased to report we might be getting somewhere. We've been working in partnership with our local charity Red Squirrel Southwest and the UK Squirrel Association, and we submitted a bid to the Forestry Commission Woods into Management bid, and we've received £270,000 from them for a 2.5-year project to target squirrel control in the coastal woodlands. So I think we've got a real opportunity to start making some significant impacts here. So this is a landscape scale project with good landowner collaboration. We've got almost complete collaboration from the landowners we've talked to. It will involve volunteers and the local community. The Animal and Plant Health Agency are interested in trialling some of their immunocontraception works that it was in the national press very recently, and Exeter University are interested in working with us on some spatial modelling. And ultimately, you know, there's a clue in the fact Red Squirrel Southwest are involved with this. You know, we've got some funding as part of this package to look at feasibility of how and when and where we might actually reintroduce red squirrels into this project area. And of course, this links really well with the coastal project and also the Two Moors Pine Marten project, which I think members heard something about a couple of weeks ago. The second corporate, I'm sorry, I'm rattling through, but we're now the second corporate plan action was around exemplary management of ENPA woodland. And very briefly, we own 528 hectares. We did have more, but the lease on the Hawkridge Woods finished, so that's now gone. We've got all our woodlands in a WD2 higher level stewardship scheme. We do make use of the England Woodland Creation Grant, so we do try and ensure that we're making most of the grant opportunities that come our way. We work in partnerships with people such as Butterfly Conservation, Plant Life, Red Squirrel Southwest, and they bring expertise, and in the case of Plant Life, significant lottery funding. So, you know, so these partnerships work extremely well. And then, of course, we need to continue to focus on timber sales, and I'll say a little bit more about that. A couple of the sites where I want to show exemplary management. Hawcombe Wood, 100 hectares of triple SI. It was declared a National Nature Reserve in 2004, and this is one of the sites that we manage. And we've had, as I mentioned, some really good partnership working with Butterfly Conservation here. One of the main activities we've been involved with is the restoration of oak coppice, and it's doing incredibly well. And this is now one of the biggest areas of traditional oak coppice in the southwest, perhaps even in England. I'm not sure, but this coppicing is a traditional form of management and assists the recovery of the heath fritillary butterfly, and this is now one of the best woodland sites in the country for the threatened heath fritillary butterfly. So a really good partnership with Butterfly Conservation here. pretty uninformative slide, but also working in partnership with Plant Life, working across a number of sites on Exmoor, and they got significant lottery funding for a project to build resilience in southwest woodlands and look to management techniques and examples of how lower plant communities can be assisted to become more resilient and robust to some of the threats that are facing them. So yeah, these partnerships work really well. You know, we have the sites, we have the management expertise, they have the science and the engagement and the money, and we really need to make much more of some of these partnerships. The second site I'd like to look at in terms of what we do, completely different approach. This is Moorwood on North Hill, where we're practicing a silvicultural system called continuous cover forestry, which is a system that works more closely with natural processes to regenerate forests, protect water, support nature, but also produce timber. And these are almost entirely regenerated through natural regeneration. And we get this really, really interesting mix of different species and different ages, which is incredibly robust and resilient. And I'm pleased to say we've got recognition for the work that we're doing there. We got awarded this recognition from the All England Woodland Resilience Group, and Lord Benyon presented this award to us in November last year, so some recognition of what we do. But the system and what we do also allows us to try and be a bit more innovative and experimental. So we've been planting walnut, for example, which is doing incredibly well in spite of the very hot, dry conditions. This is a species which is probably more resilient. No big major disease issues that we're aware of. Doesn't get damaged by squirrels and seems to be doing incredibly well. So we're taking the opportunity to enrich and diversify the species composition. But we also continue to harvest timber from these woods. And this is some high quality chestnut which we've sold on the open market, which helps us generate some income. So it's a really sound system of regeneration and timber harvesting, which helps protect some of the natural qualities of these places. In terms of timber sales, just thought I'd bring this slide up. So we monitor. We had a timber strategy which members agreed to 6 or 8 years ago, and we've been acting on that timber strategy, and we've been slowly increasing timber sales. There is a line of best fit on there which might not be very visible. Whether we can keep that trajectory up is difficult to say, but we're doing quite well. Timber values remain high. Demand seems to be dropping slightly, but timber sales are really important to us, not least because it helps us support one of the members of the team. So part of his salary is partly funded by timber sales. So there's an incentive for Jack to do more timber sales. But it's not all about selling. We continue to supply our own timber for our own uses. So you'll be aware of the gates and the signs and the bridges and all those items that we mill at Exford that go back out onto the rights of way network and into our woodland estate. But we're also using all our own timber for the fencing at Bywood. So these are chestnut stakes cleft from our own timber. The gates will come from our own timber, and all the tree stakes will come from all our own timber. So that's something that we're supplying and continue to supply ourselves. And finally, in terms of the exemplary management, as I mentioned right at the beginning, we're also looking at some of the more cultural and heritage issues, and this is Yarna Wood, the picturesque landscape of Ada Lovelace that was laid out in the 1830s, 1840s. And we've been slowly bringing some of these features back to life, and these are some of the original carriage drives. And the one on the lower side there, you can see it literally does disappear off the edge of the cliff, because there's a huge landslip that's taken that away now. But these carriage drives are really quite magnificent, planted with some of the original redwood trees, and now this was just completely covered in cherry laurel. We've now opened it. And see exactly what's going on there. And we're also doing work at Ashcombe at White Rocks Cottage to restore John Knight's picturesque garden there as well. So the third of the corporate actions that I wanted to run through is this one around to visualise what increased tree cover might look like. So we're looking at increasing tree cover in the Upper Barl on land that we own around Simmonsbath. And this concept emerged from the land visualisation exercise that Rob led on a couple of years ago. And this is one of the projects that emerged from this. It's important to say, I think, at this stage, that this isn't a proposal, this isn't what we're going to do, but we're just looking at some of how to open up a conversation and a discussion about what increased tree cover might look like and how we might go about doing some of this. So we're in conversation with Exmoor Forest Farms, with the Forestry Commission, with Natural England, and we'll discuss with our landscape colleagues and others and just see how this might actually play out. And in terms of what these visualisations look like, we worked with land use consultants, a landscape company, to look at use photographic baseline and look at what new increased tree cover might look like in some different scenarios. And we've got a few of these, but I'll just run through one example. So again, this is Simmonsbath, the River Barl running sort of from northwest southeast across that image with the sawmill at the top. And this is a view looking back up the Barl Valley, and this is the baseline. This is what the current treescape looks like. And we commissioned land use consultants to play around with a few different scenarios about what increased tree cover might look like in say 50 years' time. So this is one option. This is quite a significant increase in tree cover. I don't know, others might have a different opinion, but to my mind that seems to fit fairly well into a landscape which continues to be farmed and where farming will help maintain and enhance some of those changes. And natural colonisation is already happening. In a lot of cases in that kind of landscape, we're probably looking to do a little more than this, just kind of nudge it in a slightly different direction. And these have occurred naturally. These haven't had fences, they haven't been protected. These are just natural colonisation that has sprung up in some of these headwaters. We might think about getting some oak or hazel or other large seeded species that would struggle to colonise some of these areas. Alder or aspen that have been moved right down the valley, we might try and bring some of those back up. But in many cases, we're probably not looking to do much more than maybe, I'm getting a tap on the wristwatch, maybe looking to do a little more than actually expand and connect some of these little groups. The tree nursery, we talked a lot about that last week, or a couple of weeks ago. We're still expecting or hoping a £50,000 grant from the Forestry Commission to expand the tree nursery. And I won't talk, but we hope to supply a lot of our own trees from local provenance and better adapted tree stock for use on our own land. And we do encourage people to germinate seeds at home and bring them back to us for growing on, and we get them in a whole range of different receptacles. But we need to be careful. We want to do this properly, so somehow we need to be able to track and trace exactly what comes in, where in the nursery it is, and where it's going to be planted out to. So in the future we know exactly what the origin and provenance of some of these species are. Bywood is our new woodland near Winsford, which hopefully you've heard about. Around 10 hectares of new woodland on this site. We've completed the first phase of 8,000 trees. Phase 2 will go ahead this winter, and this has been fully funded by the England Woodland Creation Offer and through other donations from the Exmoor Trust and a Caremore appeal that we raised, and this is going ahead incredibly well. I'm really pleased with it. This was last spring, and having controlled the bracken, we got this incredible resurgence of bluebells that must have been there, and bluebells are a woodland indicator species, so it just kind of reaffirmed that we're probably doing exactly the right thing here, creating woodland back on this site. And in spite of the hot, dry weather, most of the trees have survived and they're growing. And I'll just indulge me for a minute, but as I get to sort of the 50th year of my career, which started off planting trees, it sometimes feels that all the corporate priorities and all the corporate actions pretty much come down to this. It's just getting more trees in the ground. And I think, you know, we need to do much more of this and get ahead of some of those issues and some of those problems that we've looked at before. So, thank you. I don't know how long I took, but probably far too long.
Well, thank you, Graham. It just highlights to me that presentation, which I thought was quite fantastic. That how fortunate we are to have the benefit of Graham's expertise here on Exmoor. Really incredibly fortunate. Undoubtedly there'll be a question or two. I've got Nick first, and then Mike, and then Susan. Linda.
Thank you, Chairman. Luckily enough, I can remember some of the slides because they were quite a way back when I had a question.
Okay.
But I suppose it's about the sensitivity. How do you classify the sensitivity of the area you're actually planting? Because you talked about sensitivity, low, medium, and high.
That's that first one. Thank you. Yeah, that's what constitutes high sensitivity? Yeah, so it's this is about designations, and this is the Forestry Commission's approach to understanding where there might be issues that crop up that need further consultation. So high sensitivity, sites of special scientific interest, special areas of conservation, special protection area, national nature reserves, registered battlefields. So it's areas with some designation where a tree planting proposal might come up against constraints, maybe even objections. So those would be high sensitive. Medium, on that map, it's pretty much because the rest of it is in the national park, and there may be landscape issues that we need to consider. So that's a fairly crude approach, I have to say. I think when we do our spatial mapping, we'd want to look at a lot more detail about some of the different kind of sensitivity.
Briefly, Nick.
Just lead on to that. I suppose one of the questions I was going to ask, everything talks about planting trees at the present time. That seems to be the, and I'm not against that by any means. I quite like trees and plant them if I can. The thing I would like to understand is that when you plant a tree, or when people talk about let's plant a tree and they come up and they plant trees, it looks good, but do we take into account the species that actually are planted? Because, you know, we talked about oak. That's one of the things that is a broadleaf and a really nice plant. The other subject is that there are people who have a lot of conifer trees. Do we, in the national park, do we as a national park try and encourage them to take these conifers down and replant? Do we support them? Because up at Burridge Wood, there's a place up there just at the other side of Burridge Wood when you come in on the right hand side. Yeah, I mean, I actually looked at that house at one stage thinking of buying. There was 68 acres of conifers. And I looked at it and thought, oh, God, how am I going to chop that lot down? But they're doing it at the moment. It's taken a few years, but they're actually chopping it down. I just wondered if they're going through the process of, you know, do we support them doing that and changing what's there? So there's two questions really there.
Yeah,
sorry.
So it's really interesting, and you know, we've got to appreciate, I mean, conifers are fast growing. If we want to get carbon out of, you know, sequester carbon quickly, fast growing conifers will do that very quickly. But that's, you know, and we've got to have that discussion about what we want of our landscape in terms of what trees we establish. You know, there are areas where it's probably completely inappropriate, but there are other areas where we might want to encourage conifers. It's a discussion and a debate that we need to have. Personally, I think there is a place for them in the right place. And if we are to encourage more conifer plantations, maybe it's clustered around existing commercial conifer landscapes where the infrastructure is in place for the future timber management. And do we remove them? Well, I think we possibly do, in places where they were planted inappropriately, on ancient woodland sites or square blocks on the landscape where there was little design consideration to them. So I think it is probably a case of adjusting what happened in the past to make it a bit more relevant for what we want to do in the future. But I think conifers would absolutely form part of that discussion.
Thank you.
Does that also, sorry, just very quickly,
Yeah.
about what trees you plant? You know, plant a tree, we're pushing people to plant trees, type of tree, and, you know, we talked about oak with the possible diseases, there's other ones. Do we select and say, you know, this is great, but don't plant this one, plant this one because there's more chance of surviving?
I think exactly that. I mean, there's some really useful tools available, decision support tools that the Forestry Commission has developed that help to understand how suitable certain trees will be in 50 or 80 years' time under different climate and disease pressures, and certainly things like Sitka spruce, perhaps, on dry south-facing slopes, is probably getting to the end of its time. You know, we may get one more rotation out of Sitka spruce on certain sites, but it's probably already too hot and dry in some places, and we're seeing drought stress already on certain tree species. So yeah, we have to be considerate of what we use.
There's quite a lot of beech that's losing its leaves. at the moment.
Absolutely. So we've got to look beyond our usual palette of native broadleaves and be a bit kind of creative, I guess, about where we get our trees from in the future.
What I'm going to do now, I've got several questions here, so I'm going to run through each of the people that asked their questions, Graham, and then maybe you can do a roundup after they've gone through at the end.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick.
And
And
Susan.
my apologies, my phone refused to turn itself off, so I do apologise for that. I'll remove it to the car in a moment. I was just picking up on the point, actually, from Nick. It was going to be my question. It's a really welcome to see the Exmoor Woodland Tree Strategy. It's very welcome, and it seems to be very well thought out, so well done. But are we working with other partnership landowners and private individuals to try and deliver some of these strategic objectives? So is that connectivity with other landowners that's going to be quite important? So it's really good what we're doing on our own land, but how is this translating to other landowners? And I suppose my other point was, what's the driver for this? Is it coming from the England Tree Action Plan, or is it really coming from what's happening on Exmoor and our corporate plan? I know we want some alignment between the two, but without the England Tree Action Plan, would we be doing this anyway? I mean, I like to think it's actually coming from what Exmoor has got to offer and the opportunities. So it's this alignment between Exmoor and the national level, which I'm interested in.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you,
I
Chair.
suspect there's going to be some overlap in the questions here in a minute. Susan.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Graham, that's brilliant. It's you know, so much going on. It's really great to hear it all from you. Yeah, just it was a couple of points really. I suppose one was just really welcoming the spatial mapping in terms of seeing the bigger picture and looking at a landscape scale and that sort of connectivity over the landscape, and particularly, as you say, not just looking at woodland blocks and all these smaller amounts of trees outside of woodlands. I think both in terms of the farming landscape, also into local communities, because I think it's very easiest to think of nature recovery as something out there and separate in the landscape and not part of within local communities. So I think it's really nice to see that recognition. Or what was I going to say? Sorry, too many things. But yeah, the landscape visioning, I really like that. I think I've seen it firsthand when I was involved with National Forests in the East Midlands, because I think sometimes we can be a bit, when we talk about more the need for woodland cover, and we think, well, it's going to change the landscape, and I think there is a bit of perhaps a reticence about change and how the landscape might look and how we see that. And so I think be able to actually do some of this work to actually show how it's not going to, it will change and be a bit different, but it's not like something to be concerned about or worried about, or something that's not something that we should be aspiring to in the future. So I really welcome that in terms of that need for us to think about how the landscape does need to change and how it will look, and support that. So a couple of questions. In terms of woodland creation, both for ourselves and also for other land managers, how much you may or may not know about that. What sort of appetite is there around woodland carbon code in terms of looking to generate income in the future from new woodland planting? And sorry, can I ask one more thing? It's just a point. I think it's probably no, but in terms of red squirrels coming back into the southwest, which would be lovely, obviously, I'm kind of assuming because we already have them in the UK, we wouldn't have to go through the same palavers that we have to with beaver, pine marten, etc. in terms of reintroduction, or would there still be stipulations? So, sorry.
We'll
I'll
get them.
stop.
Thanks, Susan. I think what it highlights is just how interesting a topic this is, actually. So, Linda.
Thank you. Yeah, it is incredibly interesting, and it's great that we've got time to discuss it more fully. It never ceases to amaze me how much work people like Graham can actually get through. It's just fantastic how much has been done. I have a whole list of questions, but I'll try and reduce it to 4 if I can. First of all, we've got money coming in from various sources for tree planting, but before the tree planting, we need the surveys. We need to make sure we're not digging up or planting on anything that's very rare and precious, be it a plant or an archaeological site. So where does that funding come from? Because our teams in those departments are already fully have a full workload. I'm still trying to get my head round percentages. So assuming that Forestry Commission figure was at 13.6-ish%, so what percent of increase would we have with those projects that are already happening now, like Iwood and the coastal? And then I suppose the other one is just more of interest, really. So we were looking at the climate stress in those beech trees, and I've seen it elsewhere on Exmoor over the last few years. I'm seeing it on my own little rowan plants in the garden. Is there less stress if we're planting, climate stress, if we're planting things in a larger woodland or a small copse? You know, which is the best route down? And I think I'll probably stop there.
Thank you, Linda, very much. Going to move Eric, Francis, Jeremy, and then we'll final question there from Dominic. So, Eric.
Yeah, okay. You referred to increase in planting around Simmersville. Now, I assume you're not looking to go above the yard down Simmersville Road, because that's one of the most photographed spots there is anywhere around. I was looking at Andrea, if you go far enough, it'll impact on Goat Hill Bridge car park. You can't have that. Yeah, it's already been mentioned, but this squirrel project, I don't want to be critical, but I don't think it faces up to reality. You got a big pot of money, and you're looking to control them. But if you're serious about reintroducing the red, you have to eliminate them. The two cannot coexist together. As simple as that. You can save a lot of that pot, but then, plus you've got the damage they're doing to the trees, which you highlighted. And a curiosity one, just a practical question. You showed a quick picture of the stakes you produced at Exmoor. Out of interest, what's the lifespan of they?
Leave that for a question.
Because it is a big issue amongst the farming.
Thanks, Eric. Francis and Jeremy Yabsley. Then we'll finish with Dominic.
Absolutely, one great presentation. Really good to hear all the work, and really horrid to hear all the challenges. Just a couple of things. I always have at the back of my mind that a lot of the push for the designation of this park was about the afforestation of the chains. And so all power to your elbow for getting it right, as opposed to just dumping trees on everything, which is just wonderful. And the other one is perhaps been touched on by other people, the pressure in terms of people who have no interest whatsoever in Exmoor, in terms of businesses, except to buy up land and stick trees of any sort that they don't really care about on, with no real interest in the economy, in the landscape, in anything other than a commercial decision to support a business that's somewhere else. Just how can we protect Exmoor and the national park in those terms, remembering too that what you've been talking about is making sure agriculture and trees work together, that the pressure on wrecking agriculture will come hard from those sorts of organisations and people.
Thank you, Francis. Jeremy?
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a question, but to Graham, listening to you is very reassuring. Listening to you, really got a hold on what's going on, and really interested in how you're understanding how we combat tree disease by mixing species, and I'm really reassured by the way you're talking about planting trees without impacting food production. So and planting strips and connecting woodland has huge scope for doing that without actually planting thousands of acres of new woodland. So it's new, but it's connecting and it's not impacting food production. My question, Chairman, have we developed or developing a preferred mix of species that would start to deal with the climate change orientated problems that we're seeing? Because I'd really be interested in that as a piece of work. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Jeremy. Final spot for Dominic.
Thank you so much.
Graham can.
Thanks, Graham. Fascinating as ever, and just a point to make generally is it's been great that we've had the time to discuss it this morning. If I can say this is another thumbs up for this reorganisation of how we're doing our meetings now, by allowing these mornings to actually get into these topics. I think a year or so ago this would have been given about 10 minutes and it would have been rushed. It's not only interesting, as everyone said, it's actually really important, of course, and important for our landscape. So I want to link it back to a practical point about our work, which is with FIPL, the Farming and Protected Landscapes. Is somebody mentioned earlier about Mike, but linking this to what other landowners are doing. Obviously, connectivity is important through habitats, connectivity of woodlands and fragments of woodland. As you said, we don't really know how much other woodland planting is happening out in farms, and it seems to me that if we can try and link some of these FIPL applications and the ones that are coming through the system, particularly where they're mentioning tree planting and hedgerows, is to try and see how we can help landowners, farmers particularly, understand the practical benefits of trees in agriculture in terms of, particularly now with climate change, this year, of course, what we're seeing, resilience in landscapes. When you see your livestock all gathered underneath the only tree in the field, that's telling you something. Water resilience on my land at the moment, where I have absolutely lush green grass, is actually under the trees, not out where the trees aren't. That's telling us something. So these are practical benefits that relate to the bottom line in farming when farming's under pressure, to try and get us away from this idea that trees are the enemy. And in FIPL, I think it's been disappointing that we've seen a point where we've had hedges and fences built only about 1.5 meters apart, when maybe we should have been at that point getting involved, Graham, you to say, actually, can't we make that 5 meters apart, 10 meters apart, and actually have much broader strips? That means rethinking boundaries, it means rethinking hedgerows in a way, and stop flailing everything to within an inch of its life. Thanks.
Thank you, Dominic. There's a little challenge for you then,
Yeah.
Graham. Round up from that series of questions and
Okay,
do what you can.
I'll do my best. And I can't remember who the first question was from. I did write everybody else's names down. But what's the private individuals for the tree strategy? Well, yeah, I mean the tree strategy is Exmoor wide, rather than just our own woodlands. And although we haven't met for a couple of years, we have a tree and woodland advisory group, which is essentially private landowners, contractors, and people involved in the landscape and timber industry. And they will be one of the key consultees, if you like, for this strategy. So we will get early input in terms of what the private landowners understand by this, and I think it's really important just to get that consultation and engagement completed thoroughly before this is launched as a kind of a complete strategy. So yes, thank you for that question, and yes, we will do that. What is the driver? I think ultimately it is what we want. So some of the inputs were some of the initial drivers were around the landscape characterisation exercise and what the capacity for different landscapes might be to take new woodlands. So ultimately we're looking at the special qualities and the national park purposes and the particular landscape character of the national park. Ultimately, yes, of course, it will be influenced by the England Tree Action Plan and what some of the national priorities will be, but yeah, ultimately this will be a tree plan for Exmoor, which links and is informed the national picture. So, Susan asked a question about the appetite for the Woodland Carbon Code and income. Yeah, I think pretty much every person we speak to are all also interested in the Woodland Carbon Code. We've entered buy wood into the Woodland Carbon Code. It's all a bit of a dark art, and I can't quite get my head around how we manage this. But the PIUs, the pending issuance units that we can claim for somewhere like buy wood, we could probably market for something like £26,000, and that's a fairly modest broadleaf woodland. So, you know, whether that's significant to change somebody's mind is difficult, but certainly, yeah, I think pretty much every person that expresses an interest is also interested in the Woodland Carbon Code. So there's an appetite. For how hungry people are, we'll just have to see. I think ultimately they are putting their land into a different use, and that's a big choice that people have to make. Red squirrels, stipulations. So it's not actually a reintroduction, but if we are bringing animals in from somewhere else, there'll be all sorts of plant health issues, there'll be the genetics to understand, there'll be welfare issues, so there will be licensing issues to go through. And that's still quite a long way off, and I'm not 100% sure, to be clear, but that certainly will be regulatory hurdles to go through. How do we survey? Okay, I mean, so yeah, good question. We've got we now have Robin in post, and his key role is about promoting and encouraging woodland creation, and there is money available through the Woodland Creation Planning Grant to identify any constraints, and if we need to do additional surveys, then there's additional money available to do that. The heritage team have really good information on scheduled and unscheduled heritage assets, which we'll bring in. So there's all sorts of data and tools available to help ensure that. And yeah, we would not only want to, but we'd be required to demonstrate that we weren't having an adverse impact on other interests. So, but yeah, it is a challenge, and there's a lot going on that we need to be aware of, and sometimes getting money to do these things can be difficult. But percentages of woodland, or what percentage of increase? Well, we were working on the idea that to get to the which will change, but it just gives you an idea of the area that we're talking about. If we were following the Committee for Climate Change recommendations to increase forest cover from our current 13.5% to 17.5%, we're looking at something like 100 hectares per year for 25 years. But I think we need to be much more. I think we're much closer to that target than we understand. I think if we're using other metrics around total canopy cover, which we're working on with Matt Sully at the moment, I think we're much closer to that, and I think it's probably a lot more achievable than that initial kind of figure. But you know, we do need to step up. You know, it's not simply a case of just slipping a few more trees into the landscape, thinking job done. We do need to step up and make considerable change, but it's how we get that well integrated.
Can I come back to that? How many hectares is buy wood when it's complete? Extra?
It'd be 12 hectares extra.
So that's
Yeah.
half a year.
Yeah. So if we were using that 100 hectare metric, then you can see every year for 25 years would have been quite a major thing. Chairman.
Can I just make a
Sarah.
quick comment on that? Many years ago, Graham and I worked on the New Native Woodland Challenge, so this was back in the late 90s. From memory, Graham, I think we got 200 hectares planted in 2 years.
We did, yeah.
So it is doable.
I hope that answered the question. How do we say potential climate stress? Oh, so our large woods better. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think generally bigger, better connected, more joined up, bigger woodlands are more robust and can deal with some of these changes a lot better than small, isolated, poorly connected woodlands. So landscapes, I mean, the connectivity needn't even be continuous tree cover, but landscapes that are much more better connected and are conserving resources across a bigger area, probably much more robust. Absolutely. So, you know, it's not to say that an individual tree won't have an impact, but I think it's that bigger, better, more joined up thing. It means a lot of things, and I think it means resilience and robustness as well.
That's it?
No, there are a few more. If you
There's two. If you've got a couple more.
okay, I'll very quickly. Simmons Bath, not above yard down. No, I think certainly the Simmons Bath project is pretty much most of the benefits will be getting woodland and small areas of additional tree cover in the valleys where we see better water flood management issues, where the connectivity will be much easier to achieve. And we want to respect the iconic open landscapes. I think once we start trying to challenge some of these, the issues around the chains, afforestation from decades ago, no. I think we need to be very clear about what the impacts and how some of our ambitions will be received. So I think moving into some of those highly valued iconic landscapes would be counterproductive. Squirrel project, yeah, okay, reds, greys cannot coexist, and I kind of hesitate to move into this one, but the pine martins are shown to have a very beneficial effect on red squirrel recovery. And also we're talking with the Animal and Plant Health Agency about bringing the immunocontraceptive techniques here as well, and that's a technique which, well, it's self-explanatory what it does, but that's highly targeted at grey squirrels. So I think if we were just to go out and shoot and trap, we'd probably that might get numbers down, but then to keep them down, we need a much more sustainable technique, which and Ireland have got some very good experience now of where pine martins coexist with red squirrels and keep grey squirrel numbers down. We're seeing red squirrel numbers increase and grey squirrel populations retreat. There's a lot of work to do on that, and it's a bit controversial and not fully understood, but the point that you made about we need to get rid of the grey squirrels is valid, and yeah, I think we need to bear that in mind. Stakes lifespan, chestnut stakes for our project at Bywood will last long enough to get the trees established. What we're looking at is temporary deer fencing around small enclosures so the deer can continue to move through the landscape, and then once they've served the purpose, the fence will come down. Because it's untreated, timber will just leave it on site for habitat, so we don't even need to remove it. So 15 years, I hope, will be long enough to get the fence to do its job. But I have to say that some of the treated softwood stakes that we used to use were lasting 5 years. Some of the big strainers were just snapping off at ground level. So the chains, people with no intent on planting trees, is a very interesting point. I haven't thought this one through properly yet, but I do wonder if there isn't an opportunity for some kind of community interest company to help better manage some of the carbon benefits on Exmoor. So rather than relying, some of the big investors moving in to claim carbon credits across the whole landscape, could some of the existing land managers work together in some kind of community interest company where the benefits of a handful of trees alongside small woodlands can be managed collectively, and the carbon benefits can then be used locally, and that way there's probably a stronger impetus for kind of resisting some of those powerful outside interests affecting what goes on. And there is around Ullswater, there is a community interest company that operates to manage the catchment around Ullswater, and one of their recent headlines was, we've planted 1 million trees, and it's still a farmed landscape. And there are ways of doing this, and I think that's probably something that we should explore so we can keep those benefits managed much more locally. Do we have a preferred mix of species? Not a preferred mix. We don't have a prescription, but there are certainly, as I said earlier, there are tools that can help us predict which trees are going to do better where, and there will probably be species that in 40, 50 years' time are just completely unsuitable. So that there are tools that we can use to predict what species will survive, and we use those to help plan some of the woodlands. And then, Dominic's the Fipple and hedges. Good point. I agree. I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but it's a very good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham, very much.
Can't we? I want to just move that we note this.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I was about to thank you. Thank you. I thought I'm going to be in real trouble. I've overrun by about half an hour already. But quite honestly, members, the opportunity to get Graham here and talk to us, and I do feel a little bit guilty when you listen to what he's presented to us today about taking his time away from what he's doing. So it's phenomenal value, fits absolutely with expectations of what we're supposed to be doing in National Park, and it highlights to us some of those areas of Exmoor National Park where I think we're considerably ahead of an awful lot of other people, principally due to this type of expertise that we have here. So it has been moved to note. Can I have a second? Thank you very much, John, and all those in favour. I would be very surprised if there was anyone dissenting for. Thank you very much. It's very much appreciated, Graham. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and we will look forward to a progress report in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, members. Having allowed that to overrun considerably, we will move rapidly on to the local plan implementation and delivery. And I have one public speaker. Nigel, do you want to speak first, or do you want to listen to the presentation and then speak? Right. Thank you, Nigel. So, hand over to Claire and Ruth.
Thank you. It's very difficult to follow that, really, isn't it? I'm sorry, we haven't got any lovely, slides or anything to show you, but it's still, an important area in its own right. So yes, we're here following the meeting in June, where we brought to you the conclusions of the review that we'd done, the 5-year check of the local plan policies. And at that meeting, members determined that now was not the time to review the local plan, but that there were issues that we did want to address and to move quickly on those, and also that the Planning Policy Advisory Group wished to sort of meet more regularly to consider those issues. So we said we would come back to you with a bit more detail in terms of programme for that work. So just to run through what we are proposing in the paper, the June Authority paper identified a range of topics where we felt that further work was necessary. So those were sort of based around the themes that we used for the local plan review. So that was on housing and community, particularly around affordable housing delivery, the environment, things around sustainability, climate change, biodiversity, net gain, and then on the economy, particularly around the rural enterprise Exmoor work. So in the paper, we've set out a bit more detail in terms of the pieces of work that are being proposed around each of those topics. So on housing and community, as we were doing the review, we had very helpful update from DM colleagues around the sort of the forthcoming pipeline of affordable housing. And so felt that was something that actually would be very useful to keep updated, and with we have regular meetings anyway as officers with the housing authorities and the Rural Housing Enabler to discuss progress with sites, but that was something that we proposed would be useful to update members through the Planning Policy Advisory Group meetings on. As I say, we work very closely, very fortunate in terms of positive relationship we have with the housing authorities, and the fact that we have rural housing enabling support primarily on the Somerset side. Other support is available on the Devon side through the CLT. But what we really need to do is ensure that local need housing parish surveys are updated, because they are important, obviously, as the local plan is around providing for local community needs. We do recognise that there was some extra clarity needed around the methodology for assessing local affordable housing need and resale values, and the data that is used for that. So we have commissioned some work to do that, and we will be coming back to talk to you on the outcome of that work. Some of the things that we felt could be done quickly, and to get sort of one of the things that was apparent as we did the stakeholder workshops was that perhaps there wasn't necessarily understanding of some of the things that could be done under policy already, and so we're putting together, again with colleagues in the housing authorities, a leaflet around self and custom build, and also a quick guide around our housing policies, just to help promote what can be done. Have the work that's ongoing with the Exmoor Young Voices, so we want to sort of take that forward, and link to that, sort of proposing to have a housing conference or some kind of event anyway with partners, whereby we can bring forward solutions and opportunities to the the barriers and the issues that have been identified and are quite well understood. And other practical things like the Section 106 template, so that we can provide clarity in terms of what's likely to be required. On the environment, there are things that we know we need to do anyway. So, for example, nationally now we are all required to be producing a design guide. We had already identified this as something that we wanted to update anyway. Our existing design guide is very old. It's got some very useful things in there. We don't want to lose all of that, but actually, in terms of particularly its format and the way that it's presented, we felt that it could do with a refresh, and that it also gives us the opportunity to include further guidance around some of the issues that were raised during the local plan review. That's around sustainability and climate change in particular. On that climate change agenda, we have also been working anyway with other national parks on carbon footprints of the national parks as a whole. We've been working on our own organisational carbon footprint, but this is about giving us updated data and understanding around that wider carbon footprint, and that's something that we want to be talking to partners about. And then the other thing that we have to do, again nationally, the requirement has been brought in around implementing biodiversity net gain, which will become a legal requirement, and we felt that it would be helpful, something else that came out of the stakeholder workshops with the local plan review, that it would be helpful to have some sort of Exmoor specific guidance in terms of what that means, what the opportunities are on Exmoor. And something that we're working on again anyway around local validation requirements, and updating that again, helping applicants to be clear in terms of what is required where they put applications through. In terms of the economy, some really great work that has been done through Rural Enterprise Exmoor. So this theme really is about continued partnership working on the back of the vision that members were involved in and agreed. Some additional funding was found to do some initial work on this around business engagement and networking sessions. These, I understand, have been sort of a mix of both specific sectors, so something with the Hill Farming Network, for example, on diversification, or for tourism businesses, and more general sort of skills and networking events as well. So those are underway at the moment, and as is the development of a good business guide, which is pulling together sort of existing information, but Dan will be coming to talk to you more about that in due course. So those are the areas of work that we're planning, that are in train, that we know are going to be happening around those themes. I think it's important to say as well that this work will obviously evolve and develop. New things will come in as certain pieces of work are completed. So this is something that we will keep updated and bring back for discussion. The timetable that's set out in section 5, really just what we felt was important is that, with the request to have more regular planning policy advisory meetings, that we base those around what will need to come to those meetings at what point in time. And obviously it's only an advisory group, so things will also need to come to authority for formal decisions. So the timetable that is put in the table under section 5 just identifies our plan for bringing those different pieces of work to future meetings. So the next one for the Planning Policy Advisory Group would be November. There's a probability that we would need another meeting in December, actually, because some of the housing work won't necessarily be ready in November, but we'll be able to confirm that nearer the time, and then meetings for next year as well, sort of programming what is likely to come to you in the future. But as I say, this will be something that will be kept updated and will change as work moves forward. So, anything you want to add? No? Okay. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we're planning, and happy to take any questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Have one public speaker, Mr. Nigel Ferris. You know very well the score here, Nigel, so I don't need to reiterate any of it to you. Please go ahead.
Affordable housing and business opportunities are major issues on Exmoor, and there are no simple solutions. When opportunities arise, it's necessary to explore all options, but the basic lack of agreed information has been a major problem as I work as a planning consultant. For more than a year, I've been trying to establish what the authority considers to be affordable homes to buy and to rent, with no success. Is it even possible to obtain a mortgage, having regard to the very extreme restrictive local affordable housing criteria for those who do not have the benefit of the bank of mum and dad? Without mortgages, you have nothing. So this question has to be answered at an early stage. Landowners and developers just walk away from this uncertainty, whether they can rent or sell these properties. There is a need for a much more wider approach with annual updating regarding the delivery of affordable homes. Insofar as businesses are concerned, existing business premises in villages need to be protected, and you have to look at ways of attracting new enterprises to these sites, thereby creating jobs both directly and indirectly for local residents. This authority has sadly demonstrated it would prefer to see buildings left vacant and boarded up rather than change businesses to meet the needs of today. Since COVID, live-work premises are more likely to attract money from outside the national park, and sometimes these investors wish to live on the premises, which is not recognised in the local plan. In one case, someone who was contacted the authority and was discouraged from moving to this area in the heart of a village, only to set up a craft workshop on the other side of Somerset, and now employs 6 skilled workers, which should have been here on Exmoor. Affordable housing is important, so are businesses and jobs for local residents. Please make sure the remit for implementation and the delivery of the local plan meets the criteria of local residents and businesses, and doesn't just concentrate on what the authority thinks it requires. Planning consultants like myself wish to engage in this process, and we actually meet the landowners and developers, but at the moment we are stuck. We can't deal with this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferris. And members, any questions? Any comments? Please, Christine.
Yes, I just want, I thank the girls for their patience. We had some very good and interesting meetings, and just like the work that Graham's been doing, this is ongoing work. So I'm really glad. I couldn't remember the date of the next meeting, but you've told me now. But I knew that Stephen had booked it in the diary, and we do want to meet up again, look at where we are, look at where we're going. There's much as we do a lot of work now, and village surveys, they tend to run out very quickly, because when people cannot find a home locally, they will go outside the park, Bridgewater in particular, to find a home where they can live, which is sad when they actually want to live on the moors. And I hate seeing young people who have been brought up on the moors, been to school on the moors, and then have to move away because they cannot find a home that they can afford anywhere in the area. And it's distressing for them, it's distressing for their families, and I feel very guilty about it. I know I can't fix everything for everybody, but I do want to feel that young people that really are committed to living on the moors find the opportunity to self-build, get a home, and remain in the community which they love. And I'm delighted that we're having another housing event for young people to come and talk to us, or to share with us their experiences and how they've managed it. We've got some young people that are actually going to do self-build, and we need to celebrate that and say well done to you people for sticking at the very difficult situation of trying to do it for yourself, because you can't afford to get a home any other way. So thank you for your patience. Not easy with it sometimes, but thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Got Eric, Linda, and then Mike.
And Francis.
And Francis.
Yeah, just a comment, Mr. Chairman. The issue of getting a mortgage, it's getting, I won't say the word impossible, but it's getting increasingly difficult. It's in certain spots, which includes Exmoor, it's always been the issue of finding the bit of land in the right place at the right time. But now, the cost of building materials, they started rising by 10% every 6 months 6 years ago. So they're way ahead of what's seen as inflation over the last 9, 10, 11 months. That issue, I think, is going to be the biggest issue. I won't demise the availability of these plots of land, because that's an ongoing issue. But this particular issue, at the moment, I think is getting to the point of insurmountable. I guess it's not something the local plan can actually address, but it's reality.
It is. Thank you, Eric. I mean, just to reiterate on what the paper is here, that we're looking at the work programme and timetable. So some of it is ensuring that we've got the right things in there, and your feelings around the timetable and the programme that's involved there. Linda.
Thank you, and thank you to Claire and Ruth for getting this off the ground so promptly. Really, it's great to see a programme so quickly. It's just a couple of questions, really, and I'm not quite sure whether it's the carbon footprint or the design guide. Will we be looking at water conservation and use as part of probably the design guide? And coming back to some conversation earlier, maybe effluent from campervans might be considered there. And the other question is around the carbon footprint. We're talking about the carbon footprint of the park. Will this include what the tourists, the footprint of the tourists who visit, and vehicle use, etc.? Great, thank you.
Can I run through the varying questions? Do you want to answer them as they come, or?
Do you want to take any more questions, or?
Yeah, I've got.
Take all the questions.
You have to take all the questions. Is that easier? Mike Kelly, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to assure everyone here, the work of the Planning Policy Advisory Group is very wide-ranging and very good representation, so I've found it very useful to be part of those discussions. And I'm also quite confident, having regard to those discussions, that the points that have been made here this morning are already acknowledged and they will be taken into account. So they're good points, but they have been initially discussed at least, so in terms of assurances regarding that particular point. It's a very challenging timetable, so all credit to the officers and the Planning Policy Advisory Group to meet that challenge. So it's realistic, but I think there will be some challenges in meeting it, but I'm confident we can do that. In terms of the supplementary planning document in respect of design, the initial discussions will actually look to make it a more holistic document than, if you like, a building component design guide, which is the old school stuff. It's taking into account far interrelated matters regarding biodiversity, net gain, landscape setting, historic environment, water. So I'm confident that that enlightened approach to the design guide will capture all these issues in quite an innovative way. And my final point, Chair, is just in terms of our workload, which I've mentioned. If we go to point 4.1 on the report, it talks about the Good Business Guide being in 3 parts: doing business in Exmoor, a specific tourism guide, and doing green business on Exmoor. I just wondered whether we should be saying, well, all business has got to be underpinned by an awareness of sustainability. So we don't want to create additional work for ourselves. I suspect we can probably cover both together. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Mike. Francis?
Yes. I'm acknowledging very much what Mike said, the matters being discussed in the group, which is really, really helpful. But I do want to echo what Christine has said, with which I completely agree, and I think more than the group needs to take account of this. I think all of us as an authority, and we ought, particularly in terms of understanding the economic impact and the wish to hope for a flourishing set of communities here. And if we don't solve this one, there won't be. And that's much wider than the advisory group.
Thank you, Francis. Andrea?
Oh, wasn't expecting me, yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just going to put it out there again that obviously I completely support homes for young people that have been brought up here, because frankly, you know, the one that has finished university is now working. He's desperate to move out, and I can tell you, even though it's a public meeting, we're pretty keen for him to move out as well. But moving on from that, I was reflecting on the title of this report, which is about the proposed programme and all the rest of it. And I just feel that somebody needs to, A, support our aims, corporate aims, and B, support Gordon in his endeavours, which are getting more challenging. So I do note with alarm the members asked for extra meetings. I'm then going to ask members, so not you ladies, but members, about the value. Are you confident, members, about the value of people coming here to a meeting, and that value, when we've signed a climate emergency, and the cost of just the mileage alone for us coming here is probably around, over these 5 meetings, £8,000. Are you confident that we need to meet in person that many times when we know we can do it another way? Are you confident we need that many meetings? So it was not for you.
Thank you, Andrea. There's something for thought. I'll come back in a moment. I've just got a couple of people that haven't spoken yet that I want to get to. Jeremy, did I see you, or was that a sort of...
No, apologies. No, I was going to say there was some hope. There were 2 news articles over the weekend. One by, are we allowed to mention names of building societies? One saying that they were no longer going to offer people mortgages on second homes. And there was another organisation saying they're changing their strategy to help young people get onto the building ladder. And I thought, if people are taking that sort of moral responsibility, then the work we do is being echoed widely, and we will work together and answer the questions that our speaker said at the same time.
Exactly. A couple of people wanted to come back, so really briefly, Eric and then Francis.
Yes, just probably a dig at you, Mr. Chairman, but the point I made regarding the massive differential between income costs, etc., is covered. You indicated it wasn't applicable today, but it's covered in bullet point 3. Yeah. And on Jeremy's just remark on building societies and second homes, I just cannot get my head around anyone. If you've got a couple living away from here, no matter what sort of couple it is, you just say that these days, and then one of them got a house in their name, say in Essex, and the other one applies for a mortgage, or buys a second home, and has to go through a building society to do so down here, that's one house in one name, the other house potentially in another name. I cannot see how they can stop that. That's just a personal reality check, I think.
I think there are some issues of reality with some of this as well. I'm going to go to Francis quickly, and then I've got Dominic and Susan.
Very briefly, yes, I am confident of two things. One, that the extra meeting that was put in was really valuable because of the two subjects that were going to put into one meeting. It was really felt strongly that needed to be in two. So that's one thing. The second thing on whether we should meet in person, there are many things that can be discussed online, and many meetings that can go well online. I do think that the issues here are such that it would be better to be done in person.
Thank you, Francis. Dominic, then Susan, then I'll go back to...
We're going to say the same thing. Up to you.
I'm impressed. It's just a point following. I missed the meeting, the June meeting, where we had issues about language, and just as I would say that it's not about something that we should, it's something that we have got to say, something we should want to say, and should just be part of what we do in terms of use of language. You know, people, couples, individuals, whoever, buying homes, it's just anyone, isn't it? And we shouldn't be saying we have to say these things, we should just be welcoming and just saying these things in an appropriate way.
Right, thank you. We will now move back. Comments from Ruth and...
We're going to share this between us, so Ruth's going to go first. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the questions and for the recognition. I think that we're needing to and do work in partnership with others, so particularly the housing authorities, communities, the housing enabler, landowners. You know, we all need to work together to try and solve some of these issues, problems, and important things to sort out. I think as officers we totally share your aspirations to make sure that we're doing what we can to support our communities, to make sure that young people have an opportunity to stay on the moor, or those that will need to work here can move here to work. And some of those people may be able to sort out their own housing issues, but many can't, and that's where I guess the local plan looks to prioritise those sorts of households, because those are people who have fewer or no choices sometimes about where they can live on Exmoor. In terms of the questions and points made about the surveys, that's something that we've recently discussed actually with Somerset West and Taunton, coming out of the Planning Policy Advisory Group meeting. We've had ongoing discussions anyway about how we assess local housing need. We have our own questionnaire for individual households. The surveys thing, I think we had a really useful discussion the other day about, and how we make sure that those are maintained, they're up to date, they're done speedily. So there's ways of looking at doing more online surveys as well as paper-based ones, and the value of them is I think really recognised by the Housing Authority and the Housing Enabler, who were saying, you know, it gives an opportunity to really understand the needs of that community as you do those surveys. So we're having ongoing discussions about those, I think, and we will continue to have those with the Planning Policy Advisory Group as we develop that, look to update where parishes need updated surveys. The questionnaire and the way we assess local need individually in between those surveys, if you like, or additional to those surveys, is something that is part of the work that we've commissioned as how we assess affordable housing need, affordability, sale rent values, and those other issues that have been raised by Claire doing the report. And so again, that's something we'll be coming back to members on in more detail. I think land availability is something that has been raised previously as well, and sites, we know what a challenging issue that is. Again, something that we feel we can't do on our own. Something we've been talking about with the Rural Housing Enabler, who's just the replacement Rural Housing Enabler, who started. So again, it's something that I think
we'll see if there are things that can be done. It's not part of detailed work at the moment, but it's something we'll discuss with others and see if there are opportunities to help, perhaps not directly through us, but with others' support. And then on mortgages, I think that's it's an issue that, again, it continues to crop up. The Rural Housing Enabler is very aware of that issue and has experience in that field as well. So I think we'll be relying to a degree on the expertise of others in that, because obviously it is very important for people to be able to borrow. And the Section 106 template is also going to be looked at. So it may have, maybe that Dean will be able to update on some of those things in the future. Thank you.
I'll just pick up the other points. There were a couple on the sort of environment and sustainability. Linda, you asked about water conservation. I think Mike's probably already answered that, but yes, that is being looked at as part of the design guide. And in terms of the carbon footprint work, yes, it's a really interesting approach. It's sort of slightly different to some of the more I say traditional, that's not the right word, but you know, some of the footprints that have been done up to this point have really focused on what's produced in the national park. This one is looking at what's consumed as well. It's a methodology that the Lake District sort of started working with some consultants many years ago now, actually, and that's now been looked at and updated and improved to look across all of the national parks. But what it does actually do then is enable us to look at the implications of both production and consumption of residents, businesses and visitors. So I think it's very interesting in terms of what it's you know highlighting, and certainly something that we're looking forward to kind of bringing to you and having a discussion around in due course. It's just being sort of pulled together at the moment, so we're not far off being able to share that with you. On the economy, thank you for the comments around the business guide, which I will feed back to Dan James around green business. And I think, I made the point about this being something which will keep being updated, and the comment that was made at the start from Public Speaker around availability of premises and land and working with local businesses as well is something we're obviously I'm very aware of, and I know that working with Dan James and his team as well, we are going to be looking doing some further work around that coming forward. So things are moving forward all the time on this, but just to sort of reassure everyone that that is something that's been noted and we will be looking to take forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Claire, very much. I have a recommendation. Recommended to approve the work programme and timetable. Proposed Mike Kelly, seconded by Jeremy Holton. Can I have all those in favour? Thank you very much. It's unanimous, Judy. Thank you, Claire and Ruth, very much. And we will look forward to progress through the timetable, which is time will disappear quite quickly. We'll move on to item 9 quickly. Authority meeting schedule. Andrea.
Well, there's nothing to say about it, is there? I say poor Claire talking about a calendar. But I did just want to raise, just so that because we've looked at this before, is the meeting on Tuesday the 2nd of May will be a day after a bank holiday, and that isn't always great for officers.
Yeah, I think there's holiday, there's a school term holiday, that by moving it creates an issue. So
right.
Right.
Thank you, Andrew. We did. Yeah.
Sorry? I don't know. I haven't got any kids at school anymore. No, it doesn't. Is there an extra holiday next year then?
I'm sure it was something. I thought it was wrong.
I think currently what we need to look at, we'll ask Judy to have a look at that, but to adopt the schedule of meetings here at the moment, can I have a proposer, please? Mike Kelly, seconded by Jeremy. Those in favour? And members, please note the reserve dates that are down there. Judy will release those as and when required, but assume initially that those reserve dates will be required, please. Move on to item 10, the Exmoor Consultative and Parish Forum to receive and note the meeting notes. Mike, got anything to mention about them, please?
No, the meeting was at Withypool, as you probably all know. It was well attended. There was an update supplied, a written update by the Rural Housing Enabler, but they couldn't attend in person. Dean and Ruth did a presentation all about general updates and stressed the fact that the National Park is not the Housing Authority, but we found a lot of discussion about, there was a lot of discussion, I should say, about planning and everything else, and Dean was very clear and concise on what he explained. We then moved on to the Young Voices, the summary of the Young Voices conference at Exford, and there was a lot of interesting conversations, which comes back to what we were talking about today, affordable housing and the availability of. It was very open and constructive discussions that were had, and we look forward to the next meeting, which will be on Thursday, the 15th of September, in Paracoon Village Hall. So we're going over to the west side of the moors for that one, hopefully. Yes, very good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Any comments? So, date for the diary for the 15th of September for anyone that is able to attend. So, we are required to receive and note the meeting notes. Yeah, right. Those in favour, please. Thank you very much. Everyone has read them and looked at them. Item 11, we have a personnel update. We have one starter, Elizabeth Mackenzie, Planning and Customer Support Assistant, and one leaver, Louise Reynolds, at the end of a fixed-term contract. And our thanks to the work that she has done for us whilst here. I have not been notified of any other business of urgency. So at that point, we will adjourn the meeting.